Hello and welcome back to the second ever episode of Inside the Draw. We recorded for the first time last Sunday and picked out a couple of nice bets that are still going. We'll get to that in a moment. This week I'm really excited to preview not only WTA Linz, which is a WTA 500 that starts in Austria on Monday, but the maiden clay 1000 of the season in Monte Carlo, the Principality. A tournament I absolutely associate with the beginning of the clay swing in Europe. It's maybe the most prestigious stop on the ATP Tour. A list of amazing, incredible winners, Nadal's dominance over years and years. So we're going to get through that draw. The draw came out yesterday. I definitely have some takes. We'll go through it. I do intend, when it's a Masters 1000, we'll spend a little more time and go through quarter by quarter and pick out the bets. We have an outright bet. We'll have some quarter bets and maybe some reach the final or name the finalist bets that I like at the prices. But before we do all that, let's jump in quickly and have a look at last week. So there are still, at the time of recording, there are still 4 players involved who we tipped up on the pod last week. So the main one that I liked last week was Marie Buzkova down in Bogota. Plus 900 we put her up, and thankfully she's made the final. She's going to be a significant favourite in that final. The other semi is still being played. They're actually in a rain delay at the moment. But Buzkova has had it easy all week. Touch wood. I'd like that to continue tomorrow, but she should be a decent favourite. It's probably quite likely to be Emiliana Aranga. Not the Colombian that we all would have expected to see in the final, maybe at the start of the week. But the view there was that Osorio and Buzkova were quite evenly matched in the top half, but the bookies went up with plus 250 for Osorio and plus 900 for Buzkova, so that was an easy choice. So she's still going. That was plus 900. We have Mariano Navone in a final in Bucharest. He's going to be a final favourite as well, and he went up at plus 1200, which is, a nice price to have in the final now at odds on. He was actually 16 to 1 a little before that when we recorded last Saturday. So hopefully some people got on at plus 1600. And then Jess Pegula in the final in Charleston. Not a major surprise there. She's had to work pretty hard every round and was pushed by Iva Jovic today, who I'm really enthused about that player and what she can do in the clay season and on all surfaces. Really, she's super, as we saw down in Australia. And then the last one is TFO. He's in a bit of bother in Houston. He's in a semi-final against Tommy Paul. He's down a set, he's up a break, and they're rained off, so who knows when that'll come back. I imagine it will come back today. He's under a bit of pressure. Hopefully he brings it to a deciding set. They're coming back, I think, 4-3, 30 all, so I hope he holds serve and comes back and gets it into a decider, and you never know. He's got a super record. He was 8 to 1 down in Houston, so let's see if he can win. But a nice position to be in. Hopefully it encourages some people to follow along and listen. We won't always have weeks where we'll have any finalists, let alone 4 finalists, so really nice position to be in from the first pod. I have been trying to post reels and shorts throughout the week and to get people to follow along. Obviously, as the podcast starts, we need to increase engagement, and hopefully some of the performances of the bets will speak for themselves. Okay, so let's go straight into Monte Carlo. Before we jump into this year's draw and the quarter by quarter kind of preview of the tournament and some betting picks, I would just like to look at Monte Carlo as a tournament and maybe what that means. For me, certainly, I can't speak for every tennis fan, but when I think of Monte Carlo, like I said in the intro, it absolutely, brings me to the start of the clay season. Okay, we started last week. This is the real proper start of the clay season. You go from Monte Carlo into Barcelona, into Madrid, into Rome, into a week off before Roland Garros, and it's just all action. We have 3-4 1000s over the next couple of weeks and a Grand Slam culminating in Paris. And if you think back on the men's side last year in Paris, I was on Sinner personally, and he served for the tournament, and then he lost it he got broken, he lost in a tiebreak, and then I think he lost in a super tiebreak in the 5th set. But it was a crazy game, a crazy match between himself and Alcaraz. One of the best matches I can ever remember. It's probably romanticizing a bit or being a bit hyperbolic, but it was certainly a super entertaining match. So for me, Monte Carlo is it's lavish. It's all the best players show up. Half the players actually live there. The tournament looks amazing. The courts look amazing. And I think you get buy-in from all the top players, which is, one of the important things I think to make any big week and big tournament. You see in a week like this, what we've just come out of, not many top players on either side participating. Probably the biggest player is Jess Pegula, and that's only because she was defending a title, and they had a 500 but for the women. So let's see. But it certainly for me, Monte Carlo signifies like the real start of the clay season, and kind of ratchets up the excitement levels and the enthusiasm levels a little bit. And if I think of the tournament, I kind of jotted down a few things that came to mind. One is that Federer never won it, for all of his like ability and even his clay knew, I would say. And he obviously got the Roland Garros title in the end. Like, people think, it's clay, Federer was never any good on clay, and I think that's kind of a casual take. And honestly, Federer is probably a top 5 all-time clay courter. And he just happened to run into Rafa Nadal in his prime, and Novak Djokovic to a slightly lesser degree. But like those two for me are probably the 1 and 2 all time on clay, and then you bring in historic if you want to go back and look at other players like Borg or whoever. But Federer is probably, there's an argument Federer's the 3rd best clay courter ever. So I'm glad he got his Roland Garros in the end. But never getting Monte Carlo is certainly interesting, and probably not one that you would think, because it's a tournament that he obviously cared about a lot, and all the top players did, but he ran into Nadal a lot of times and other foreign players over the years. Nadal's record there of 11 Monte Carlo titles, I was thinking about this before recording, and I think there's a case to be made that is, if not equally, maybe more impressive than his 14 Roland Garros titles. And the reason for that is that it's the shorter format. So and also like the variance is increased by coming in with the very first clay tournament of the season. So he hasn't got his clay legs yet. He hasn't had a tournament to get himself into form. Oftentimes he's coming from the Sunshine Double, whether he's played Miami or not. And you don't know who you're going to come up against. You don't know how they're going to be set for clay. So that in itself brings a ton of variance. But then the other variance, and the bigger part of the variance, is it's a best of 3 instead of a best of 5. So you come up against a John Isner who's serving out of a tree, as you saw in the French Open a couple of years ago, probably 10 years ago at this stage. Isner was up 2-0 on Nadal. Like you do that in Monte Carlo, it's game over. So I do think like the best of 5, the best players, and that's why you see so few upsets really in the men's Grand Slams at the latter stage, or even like winning a Grand Slam. It's impossible for like a fluke win of a Grand Slam over a best of 5 sets and trying to win 6 or 7 matches, 7 I think. But the Monte Carlo, to win 11 titles there is like staggering, really, and it just shows his dominance and how he was able to assert himself over all of the other players as the real alpha on clay. But yeah, 11 there. I do think it's equally as impressive as the 14 Roland Garros, because you can have a set off, you can have 2 sets off, and still he's probably favourite against most people if he's 2 sets down. But you can't do that, and because of that, there's more pressure. There's more pressure to win tie breaks or to convert your break points, and that record of 11, I don't think that'll ever be touched. Not that Roland Garros is ever going to be touched at 14 either, but crazy good record. The other thing that struck me about that, trying to think of Monte Carlo, I'm pretty sure that was the tournament where Federer told Djokovic's parents to shut up. Tennis fans listening to the pod will be aware of that clip's existence. I'm almost certain, I didn't check, but I'm almost certain it was at Monte Carlo. I don't know what it was. I think, like, were they being loud? I can't quite recall. Or maybe they were trying to tell him to hurry up. I can't recall, but he definitely looked up at the box and just said, shut up. And it was such an unexpected thing to happen. Like, tennis is, classy, and Federer oozed class, and then tell another parent's box, and not just, another player's box, and not just the box, but their parents to shut up, when Djokovic was like pretty well established at that stage. Borderline shocking, but certainly a memory from this tournament. And the last thing I wanted to mention about Monte Carlo, Fabio Fognini's title in 2019, one of my favourite. I always liked Fognini. Head case, yes. Live wire, absolute shot maker, like crazy clean how he hit the ball off both wings, particularly the backhand. Just so at home on clay. Like, I remember hearing over the years how like the top players would try and find him when they're at tournaments or at slams and they're hitting, and I don't even mean clay, just to get that quality of hitting partner, because Fognini was so good. And he's had his moments where he's been a pain in the ass. I remember the match against Murray where Murray came back after, I think, his hip surgery, and they had this fight and he told him to shut his mouth. And like, I'd say Fognini is a borderline asshole at times, certainly getting under other players' skin, but as a talent, my goodness. And And I had to go back and look. Like I remember the final he won. He played Dusan Lajovic in the final, which, as the Masters 1000 on clay goes, is obviously a very easy final. Now, Lajovic came through a serious path himself, and Lajovic is a very serious clay courter over the years himself, particularly at his peak, and he is still playing. But that was an easy enough title to not have to play like a Djokovic or a Federer or whatever. But I did have a look back through the draw, and like Fognini had his entire family over because of the proximity to where he's from in Italy, and he almost viewed it as a home tournament, and like the crowd was raucous for him, and just the upset, and he took absolute delight in beating Nadal anytime, but particularly there. And if you go back and look at the highlights, just completely incredible. I would recommend going back and looking at Fognini's Monte Carlo highlights from his 2019 run, and pick the Nadal match to look at, which is the semi. But his route was Rublev, Gilles Simon, Alexander Zverev, Borna Coric, Nadal. Like, what a 5 matches to get to the semis and to get past the semis into the final. And then, okay, he played Lajovic in the final and took care of him easily. So the Lajovic final, you could say, okay, maybe it's a bit easy. But Rublev, Simon, Zverev, Coric and Nadal to get there. Like, just an outrageous performance, an outrageous week. And by no means a fluke. He could put it together. He was an immense clay courter. And I do miss watching him, and I miss just the fun. He was on the no-bet list. I'll probably look at a no-bet list on another pod in the future, so I won't spoil it for now, but he would have been on a no-bet list with the likes of Monfils, the likes of Paire, certain players that you just would not trust with your money, and Fognini was on that list. But he put it together that week, and he was incredible, and probably he was an underachiever in his career given like the talent levels that he had. But amazing, and I wanted to mention that when it came to Monte Carlo this week in the preview for the tournament. So let's take a look at the draw. Let's jump straight across. We're going to take a look at the Monte Carlo draw. We won't look at WTA Linz on this pod because there's no betting. Not only is there no betting, there's no draw. The qualifying draw has been made and the doubles draw has been made, but the singles draw hasn't. Or if it has, it hasn't yet been published. And I did check 10 minutes ago. So we will have to come back and do a quick 10 minutes on Linz tomorrow, and I'll snip the picks onto the end. But let's jump into the main purpose of this draw. I probably had enough of me rambling at this stage, but let's jump in and look at Monte Carlo. So obviously you have Sinner and Alcaraz 1 and 2. Alcaraz top seed, Sinner is second seed. So they're on different sides of the bracket. And the first thing for me is always, from a betting perspective, who's got the draw here? Who has won the draw between those two, if you consider them as the number 1 and number 2 talent, or 1A, 1B, which they are. And split them whatever way you like on clay. I do not have a preference for Alcaraz over Sinner just because it's clay. I think Sinner is incredibly reliable and efficient, doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't have the drop shots or maybe the touch or the explosiveness of Alcaraz, but at the same time he doesn't have, like, while Alcaraz has the peaks, he also has the troughs, and Sinner doesn't have those. So in many ways I actually prefer Sinner to Alcaraz when I'm having an outright bet or in a Grand Slam or even head to head. I actually just prefer being on Sinner. It feels better to be on Sinner for the most part than being on Alcaraz. But we take it tournament by tournament, and the first thing that strikes me about this draw is Alcaraz has had his way. He has gotten an incredible draw, and Sinner on the other hand has not. And there are other reasons to not love Sinner here that we'll get into when we get to the bottom half, but like just a high level looking at the draw, Alcaraz has got the draw, and Alcaraz is minus 110 in the market, and it's probably a bet we might hold off and try and get a better price closer to Monday. I don't know if I'd be rushing to bet the minus 110. Do I think Alcaraz is the most likely winner? Yes. Is Sinner way too short at plus 105? Also yes. But I think there's better value in the field, and some of the other markets might provide some of that better value. But we'll get into it. We'll look now, quarter one, obviously headlined by Alcaraz, we just touched. The other player with a seeded buy is Sasha Bublik, and clay is not the place you want to be siding with Sasha Bublik, so that in itself is a lovely result for Alcaraz. The only real danger in here, and I'm not going to go match by match, like Alcaraz is going to play Sebastian Baez probably, or maybe Wawrinka in his swan song in Monte Carlo, who got a wild card, which is nice to see, by the way. Going to play them in round 2, and then it's like Tiafoe or Apmane or Echeverry or Dimitrov. None of them are going to sniff Alcaraz on this surface. The only semi-danger is Yuri Lehechka coming off, obviously, a really super week in Miami where he went to the final and played Jannik Sinner. look, he's a great player. I don't mind him at all on clay either. There's no one really else in that little section with Bublik that I think is going to trouble Lehechka. Alejandro Tabilo is there, Griekspoor is there, but Griekspoor is coming off a horrible showing in Marrakesh where, that was his first tournament back from a back injury. Fuchsovics I don't trust, Tabilo I don't trust. Lehechka's going to come through there and play Alcaraz in my opinion in the quarterfinal, and I think that's a pretty simple one for Alcaraz. It'll be his toughest test to that point, but I don't think it's going to be a real test for him. So I see Alcaraz coming easily through quarter one, barring some sort of unforeseen circumstance or an injury or something we don't expect in terms of really poor form. So while he has an easy quarter one, quarter two is a little bit more loaded. I think the class of quarter two are the two seeds who have gotten the byes, and that's Lore Musetti and Alex de Minaur, the fourth and fifth seed respectively. Personally, I prefer Musetti there. I like the Italian angle in Monte Carlo where, they tend historically to get a ton of Italians supporting and playing and coming over to watch for the week. So I do like Musetti there. And also I just love Musetti on clay. He did have his injury concerns at the Aussie Open, so that does put me off a little bit. But also there are some other semi-threats in here. So Jakub Mensik is in there. Mensik obviously had that win over Sinner in the Middle East a couple of months ago, I guess 2 months ago at this point. So he is a super ball striker. I like him a lot. Could he upset de Minaur, Musetti? He absolutely could. He can upset anyone on his day. I guess if he went out in red zone for 2 hours, he could probably upset Alcaraz. So he is a live wire and a dark horse that I kind of don't mind at all. But at the same time, another player who you're really depending on painting lines, which in itself is not exactly, I think, what you want to be looking for. And then the only other kind of danger, it's not even really a danger, Luciano Darderi is in there, but again, if he was as good as I think he should be, he'd be winning Marrakesh this week, and he got beaten in the quarters, so not the form you would look at, so I bypass him. Shapovalov, kind of terrible on clay for my money. Norrie I don't trust, Kecmanovic I don't trust. So to me it's either going to be Musetti or Mensik, who are in the same kind of little section, one of those two to play de Minaur. And I would probably prefer Musetti over any of those three in terms of, betting or looking at it from that perspective. But do I expect any of those to be able to challenge Alcaraz in a semi-final? No. So Musetti to me has the best chance of challenging Alcaraz, and again he's quite at home on clay. He has produced lovely results in the past on clay. So Musetti is probably the best hope of that top section at troubling Alcaraz, but he needs to keep really clean for the few rounds before. Keep his powder dry against Mensik, come through that one, come through de Minaur, whereas Alcaraz's path is just much cleaner, much easier. So overall, to summarise top half, I have Alcaraz coming through pretty easily, and Musetti would be my biggest dark horse. Then we go into the bottom half, right? The third quarter is where it gets interesting. The two seeds that have byes are Medvedev and Zverev. Zverev's record on clay speaks for itself. I believe in Zverev. I was on him to win the French the year, I'm pretty sure it was the final, or was it a semi? I'm pretty sure it was a final. Either or. He played Nadal and he played a fantastic first set. Should have served it out, didn't, got broken, was miles ahead in the breaker and had a couple of set points. I think it might have been 6-3 or something, 6-2 even. And chose the wrong way on an easy backhand put away at the net, and Nadal picked off a crazy passing shot. Won the set somehow, a miraculous set that he should never have won, and then Zverev went over and basically did his ankle in that kept him out for a few months, if you recall. But he really had Nadal semi-rattled on that day. So Zverev's top level on clay, unbelievable. Clay is somewhat of an equaliser for him against Alcaraz and Zverev, I think, where he lacks maybe the ability on the faster hard courts. I think he makes up for it on clay, and he's really, really dangerous on clay. So to me, he's the third best player in the world on clay. At the same time, there are players probably, close enough to him ability-wise who you can get at much bigger prices, so I'm not necessarily saying he's always the best bet. So Medvedev, I think, is he came out this season and he's put on a show. He played super in Indian Wells, obviously made a final there after beat Alcaraz and lost to Medvedev. Sorry, beat Alcaraz and lost to Sinner. But he was amazing, and he looked exactly like the old Medvedev again. Aggressive, taking balls, that octopus kind of ability to just get to anything. So I'm a believer in Medvedev, but I'm not necessarily a believer in him in clay, and I think his attitude in clay is, get me off this surface, I don't want to be here. So that's always a danger to put your money on. Fonseca's in there. just super ability. And I think this is a kind little draw for Fonseca. So he comes through, it's like a walking by in the first round for me. It's Gabriel Diallo, who got destroyed in his first match as a 1 seed in Bucharest last week. Just shocking on clay. Fonseca should steamroll him for me. Then Fonseca comes up against Kashanov most likely. Again, for me, I would fancy Fonseca there. Kashanov lost to him on hard courts about a month ago. I think it could have been Indian Wells. Can't remember if it was Indian Wells or Miami, but Fonseca beat him. And I think Fonseca would also beat Medvedev and would be a favourite over Medvedev on clay. So I like Fonseca here in this little section. And then the other section of the third quarter is Zverev section, but it's dangerous enough. You've got Rublev in there. You've got Nuno Borges. Okay, and Zverev. It's not as strong as I thought it was. But Rublev and Zverev, you'd have to imagine Zverev will come through that one pretty easily. And he has an easier section. He plays in Pesci Perikar probably in his second game. Not a clay courter by any means. Can't rally. Can't hit a backhand in a rally. Unbelievable serve on a fast quarter on grass. Massive danger. Comes in to the net and finishes off points at ease. But I think that's going to be Zverev from the bottom section, and I am predicting Joao Fonseca to come through that top. So we're looking at a Fonseca Zverev quarter final for my money there. So that one to keep in mind when we get to the prices in a moment. And then the bottom section, the 2 seeds are with buys Felix Auger-Aliassime and Yannick Sinner. And Sinner speaks for himself. Auger-Aliassime has a relatively easy section. Auger-Aliassime has a relatively easy opening round or two, but after that, he has the one that I am particularly keen on here, and that's Casper Ruud. I think Ruud is a top 4 player on clay. Probably with Zverev, so the two big guns, and then Zverev, and then Ruud would be how I would kind of view it on clay. Maybe Musetti is in the mix for a top 5, but those 5 are my favourite 5 on clay. Ruud has been to multiple French Open finals, ran into Rafa Nadal twice, I think, but just unbelievable on clay. That forehand when he has time and the ball sits up, the danger he can do with it. And the backhand has improved over the years. You always get that effort level from Ruud that is refreshing when you're backing a player. Very smart player, very honest player, a player who will give his all, but also you can be sure he has trained well, he has prepared well. You are going to get 95% out of him all the time, as opposed to a player who might give you 100% one day, but then the next day you're getting 60% effort. Ruud is just someone I like to have on side on clay. I think he has a nice little section here. He has Alexei Popyrin to start. Popyrin is not the walkover that you would have thought maybe a year or two ago on this surface. He went pretty well and made the quarterfinals in Houston this week just gone, and TFO had to come by in a tough enough quarterfinal match to get past him. So it's not a gimme there, but I expect Ruud to have too much class. And then it's Corentin Moutet in the next match, and then the winner of that quite likely to play Felix Auger. Now Auger has to come through Cilic again, should be no problem on clay, but you'd be looking at a Ruud Felix whatever it is, 3rd or 4th round, and for me on clay, Ruud has a lot extra in hand in that matchup. He'd probably be in $1.40, $1.50 kind of price range to beat Felix Auger, depending on how they both come through. And then the winner of that is playing for the right, most likely to beat Sinner. Sinner has in his little section, he doesn't have it easy. Ugo Humbert is down there again, not a clay courter, would prefer a fast indoor hard court, for example, or grass, but he's dangerous nonetheless. Daniel Altmaier is in there who can play on clay. And then the top of that section is Francisco Cerundolo against Stefanos Tsitsipas. I think Cerundolo will come through that one. I'm not high at all on Tsitsipas, and I'm actually really high on Cerundolo. He had a super run in Miami, and that's on a hard court that, he never does his best work on a hard court. He is a clay courter through and through. Few things to say on that draw. If you're ever going to get a chance to beat Sinner, it's going to be this tournament. He is coming off a sunshine double. He played 2 weeks in Indian Wells, 2 weeks in Miami. Obviously, those tournaments are compacted into actual 10 days now. But by the time the player arrives and leaves and practices end to end, you're looking at 2 weeks for both of those tournaments. So that's a month on hard courts. Then he goes back to Europe, probably takes a few days off. Then he comes to Monte Carlo and he gets there, probably yesterday or whatever. Tournament starts in 2 days' time. But On the other hand, you have Casper Ruud, who's like probably already a week in Monte Carlo, definitely a week hitting on clay. Same applies to Alcaraz, by the way. Alcaraz went out early in Miami, and then, you know, he's hitting on clay. He's back in Europe a week or 10 days ago, as is Ruud. They're just better prepared coming into this. I'm not saying they're better players than Sinner. They're not. Certainly Ruud is not. There's a chance Alcaraz is. They're certainly very evenly matched. But I just think preparation-wise and in terms of getting a chance to upset Sinner that you're not going to get in Rome, or you're not going to get, okay, maybe you get in Madrid because of the altitude and it's a little bit of an outlier on clay, but Rome, like, you can be sure Sinner is 100% bought in Rome. You can be damn sure he's 100% focused and bought in for Roland Garros, and he's perfectly prepared at that point of the season. There is a chance he's not 100% prepared for Monte Carlo, and that's why I prefer Alcaraz in the outright, and that's why I prefer to take Sinner on here in this quarter. And the player I'm going to try and take him on with is Casper Ruud. Like, he's the obvious class. If you strip Sinner out, the ratings for me of that quarter would be Ruud is the best other player and Cerundolo is the next. So Cerundolo, I hope Cerundolo comes past Tsitsipas, because Cerundolo does have a chance to beat Sinner. He's going to be a big price to do it, but he can do it. And he's like, if he's ever got a chance, like I say, it's this tournament. And that would be obviously amazing to not have to have Ruud be the one to take him out. Ruud could absolutely take him out. Look, these are all none of this stuff is expected to happen. Sinner will be favoured in every single match all the way through to the final. He might even be favoured in the final against Alcaraz, and that's the expected final. Like, that's the one that the bookies have as the most fancied match to materialise when the final does come around. And obviously it is the most likely one, but like, there are chances at the upset here, and the three players in the bottom for me that have the best chance of the upset are Fonseca, Zverev and Ruud. And then, like, you know, Zverev's price to upset is not necessarily a big price that's like going to surprise anyone. So I think the ones that you want to look at here are Fonseca and Casper Ruud. And actually, of those two, I do prefer Ruud's price. So let's just open up DraftKings for a second here and pop in. Let's jump into the winner market first. So the winner market has Alcaraz minus 110 and Sinner plus 105. So it's kind of not far off a fair pick. Zverev is there at 14 to 1. Fonseca at 50. Casper Ruud at 50. And then there are other players that honestly don't interest me that much. Musetti is at 40. Again, fine. Musetti is in Alcaraz's half, which is why I don't like him as much as some of the others. I think in terms of the outright, I'll probably stay away from Alcaraz at minus 110. I think it's a tiny bit short, and I'm not interested in Sinner at all. If I was to bet one of Alcaraz or Sinner, if you prefer a bet on one of the big two, by far Alcaraz is a better bet at minus 110 than Sinner at plus 105. No question in my mind, just because of the draw and the way it's worked out. Sinner has to go through a tough enough section in Cerundolo and Ruud just to get to Zverev, just to get to Alcaraz. Plus 105 is horrific. Alcaraz has a really much easier route to get there. He will likely have to come through Musetti or Fonseca after his quarter, and like, that's way easier obviously than Sinner's route. So if you want an outright bet on one of the two seeds, it's Alcaraz, there's no question. For me, I like Zverev at 14s, so I think that's got a little bit of juice on it. He is a super clay quarter. He likes it here. He lives here. He's a resident year-round here. All of these players are resident here for tax purposes, which I get, but it's either here or Dubai, and I think a lot of them prefer to be in Europe, and if they're in Europe, they're in Monte Carlo. So Zverev at 14, don't mind that at all, 40 plus 1400. The other two, actually, I'll only go with another one, maybe Joao Fonseca at 50s is not bad at all, and Ruud at 50s. But if you bear with me for a second and we switch across to reach the final market, that's unfortunate. This was Casper Ruud was in to make the final market at plus 4,000, so he was 40 to 1 until 10 minutes ago, and in the process of recording that has switched to 18 to 1, so that value is no longer there, unfortunately. That obviously would have been a great bet, so with that in mind I probably would back Ruud as well at plus 5,000, so that's Ruud and Fonseca at plus 5,000 and Zverev at plus 1,400. Those would probably be the three outrights that I would take a look at. Yeah, it's a disappointing one to miss that Ruud price, but we don't want to just take prices just because it's like halved, just because that's the only price that's there. I'd rather skip the price than take 18 to 1 than 40 to 1 when it was there 10 minutes ago. So, but these are the prices to keep an eye out for when tournaments get priced. And all of the books haven't gone up yet. At the moment, all I see up are DK and 365. I don't at all mind a Carlos Alcaraz versus João Fonseca name the finalist selection at 33 to 1. And I actually probably prefer that than the make the final prices of 18 to 1 for Fonseca. And it's the same price for Ruud. Alcaraz against Ruud plus 3,300. So 33 to 1 for an Alcaraz Ruud final. Basically saying, look, I think Alcaraz is going to be relatively safe where he is in his half. And I do think that. I would be amazed if Alcaraz doesn't make the final. And then my two favourites are, at the prices, my two favourites are Fonseca and Ruud in the bottom half. Like, for example, they're both 33 to 1. Alcaraz Zverev final is plus 800. So, like, yes, Zverev is the third best clay courter, but it's already baked in. And I think Fonseca has upset potential, and I think Ruud has upset potential. So I really like both of those. I wish the 40 to 1 Ruud to make the final was still there on its own, but that's obviously been taken. The quarter betting isn't available yet, so DK don't have it, 365 don't have it, and FanDuel aren't even up with the market yet. So we'll skip that and come back to it tomorrow when we're clipping WTA Linz for the women, and I will include some quarter bets for the men. They are likely to be along the lines of some of the players we just mentioned, but it'll be totally dependent on price. So just to summarise, if you want to bet one of the big two, it's got to be Alcaraz. There is no bet to be had on Sinner here. Do not bet Sinner at plus 105. Alcaraz minus 110 is fine. Don't mind that at all. I'm not rushing to bet it myself. I probably won't back that. I would prefer to have a smaller bet and bet Zverev at plus 1400, Fonseca at 50 and Casper Ruud at 50. But if you're asking, do I prefer those two at 50 or the name the finalist with Alcaraz for both of those two at 33, I prefer the name the finalist. I just think it's better value. Let me see, are there better prices on 365 for any of those? Casper Ruud is plus 6,600 on 365. So that's the one to bet on the outright if you're looking for a bet there. Like I said, no WTA Linz draw yet, so we will come back and look at that. There's a pretty decent field that's been established there, so I am actually quite excited about that, and see what players show up and see where they're drawn and what the prices are. Honestly as well, at this stage, like to say, I prefer women's tennis. It is more open to upsets, particularly at the elite level. Like, it's very hard to get Sinner and Alcaraz beaten, particularly in slams, but also in the Masters 1000s, as you just saw. I like betting the women's ones more. There's a little bit more variance in there. I feel like the markets aren't as efficient either. So we will check back for WTA Linz. And I'll come back with some quarter picks as well for the men in Monte Carlo when we get more lines over the weekend. It might be a case that FanDuel or some of the other books go up with bigger prices, and if so, shop around. Like I said, Alcaraz is fine to bet outright. Sinner is absolutely not at that price. And then if you want kind of three outsiders or dark horses, for me, it's Zverev at plus 1400. It's João Fonseca at 50 and Casper Ruud at plus 6,600. Ruud in particular there for me. I prefer Ruud over Fonseca anyway, and he's a bigger price. So for me, that's a no-brainer that he's the outsider to take. I'm seeing lines on Francisco Cerundolo at 250 to 1, so plus 25,000. Completely fine to have a few dollars on that as well. He's super. I don't think he's going to be able to upset the amount of players he would need to win it out, but like I don't mind it as a throwaway kind of outsider. That's all for today. We've gone through the draw. We will come back for Linz and for the quarter bets in Monte Carlo. Look, please please subscribe, please follow along. I'm going to preview these every Saturday or Sunday whenever the draws come out into some betting lines. I won't always go through quarter by quarter for 500s or 250s. I definitely won't. I likely will for all of the Masters 1000s on the men and women's side, and obviously for the Grand Slams I will. I'm constantly posting throughout the week, following along with reels and shorts and stories. So we're on YouTube at Inside the Draw, and we're also on Instagram at Inside the Draw, and we're about to be on Spotify and Apple Podcasts from this week. So please sign up, follow along, and hopefully you enjoy your tennis as much as I do. And thanks for being here.